We are going to today complete our study in Joshua. And you're like, wait a second, the first week we were in chapter 1, the second like in chapter 3, and then chapter 6 last week. Today we're going to be in 24. So you're wondering what happened between all of that time? A lot of fighting and winning. That's what happened. There was one loss though, but there was a lot of fighting and there was a lot of winning. So that's kind of what happened. So if you guys want to turn in your Bibles to Joshua chapter 24, that's where we're going to be. All right, so we got our acoustic paneling guy coming next week, and he's going to look at this space, and he's going to give us some big-time recommendations for this, so I'm looking forward to being able to not hear myself off of every single wall in the room. All right, you guys awake today? How are you guys liking morning service? Yes? I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty fired up about knowing that the rest of my afternoon is free. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, this is great. 6 years of an afternoon service, and now we get to have a morning service. I'm pretty excited about that. Okay, I want to tell you guys, so I was in the Apple store, which name drop, by the way, Spike Lee was in there the other day. And I was like, literally he was standing behind me while we were waiting for it to open. And I was like, what's up, dude? It's kind of crazy. But you know what? So my phone was dead, right? So the screen was dying. So I was going in, I got a picture of Spike Lee, okay? But then I went into the Apple store and they gave me a new phone. So guess what? I don't have anymore. A picture of SpikeLee, so you're just gonna have to take my word for that. But so I was in the Apple store. I'm hanging out in there, and again, they're looking at my phone. They're trying to diagnose it, and they just realize, hey, your phone is no longer any good. Which, by the way, it's a 16. So I was like, I just got this phone, but they were like, something's wrong with the motherboard. I'm like, whatever, you guys just do your thing. And so they were doing all of this, getting everything ready. And what do I not have? I'm waiting for 2 hours. In fact, this is something you don't want to hear from your Apple technician. You've been here my whole shift. You don't want to hear that. But I was there for over 2 hours, hanging out with this lady, sitting at one of the tables there, and I don't have a phone because they have my phone. What do you do in 2025 for 2 hours when you don't have your phone? Because I look around in the store, there are tons of people in there waiting, but you know what they're doing? They're on their phones. I'm over here acting like it's 1996. I got nothing. And I'm just sitting there. And then I realize there's a person across from me who also is acting like it's 1996. So what do? We catch eyes and we're like, hi. And we talk like it's 1996. And so we're sitting there and I'm like, well, I guess, like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I dropped my phone in the toilet. I was like, oh, okay. Sorry about that. So anyway, so they're getting their phone repaired. Everything's happening. I'm sitting there, I'm talking to this person, and I just strike up, and I'm like, so you live here? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, for how long? And they were like, I've been here for 45 years. This guy was probably in his 60s. And I was like, man, 45 years, that's a long time in the city. He's like, what about you? And I was like, well, I'm 43 years old. And I was like, but I've been in the city 6, so, and he was like, all right. So, and I just started to ask him kind of, what he did. I was like, what brought you to the city? He used to live in California. I said, what brought you to the city? And he said, well, I wanted to pursue a career in acting. And I was like, man, that's really cool. And I said, so is there any of the stuff that maybe you've been in that like I might know or have heard of? And he was like, no, because I never actually went into it. And I was like, oh. And so he started telling us kind of like what happened. And he said, well, what happened was I as an actor, you can't survive on desire for acting, right? So you have to actually get what's called a job. And he said, so I was working like 2 or 3 jobs just to support living here so that I could go to different auditions. And he said that there was one job that he had that he kept getting promoted in. And so he kept taking that because it was more pay. And that meant that he didn't have to do these other jobs because he's getting more pay. But then he said as was getting paid more, they also required more commitment. So then I ended up staying in that job, and I ended up doing it. And then after a while in it, I didn't have time to audition anymore because that job demanded too much time. And he said, and then time slipped away, and here I am 45 years later, and I never actually went into it. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, do you have any regrets? He said, yeah, I regret it all. He was like, I shouldn't have taken that job. And so we're having a counseling session at the Apple bar right there. And I said, man, and he said this is what he said, and this stuck with me. He said, I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do. I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do. Jerry Seinfeld was asked one time, he said, hey, where do you get your material? He said, living life. He said, whenever you're just living life, you don't have to go look for material. The material comes to you. He's a comedian, by the way. And as a pastor, that's how I feel. Where do I get my sermon illustrations? Where do I get material? It just comes to me, because when that man said, I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do, that'll preach. Because I think there are a lot of Christians who are maybe kind of towards the end of their life or towards later years in life, right? And man, they look back and they've got this job and they've done all these things. And I mean, we live in New York. That's his testimony is our testimony, right? Whenever we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, he gives us a new desire. He gives us new hearts, and we're what's called on fire for Jesus. But what happens? Why does the fire die out? I think it's because we get distracted from what we were meant to do. And we as New Yorkers understand that better than anyone, because we are just trying to pay rent. We are just trying to get to our commutes, right? I saw yesterday, this is great. A commute from the Bronx to Brooklyn is the same time it takes to fly from New York to Florida. Did you know that? Yeah. So we got to commute. We've got to go to all the, our time is precious. And then here we are also trying to live missionally for God. And we're like, all right, God, I know that I need to reach these people. But then we wake up and we start thinking about what we got to do, what we got to get done, what's that day. And then we go to bed and we're like, oh man, the missional thing. We might come to church and go, that's right, I'm supposed to live missionally. Or maybe Sundays now we have to work. And so we're not living, we don't even get that reminder on Sundays that we have to live missionally. And so now years go by, and before we know it, we're just like, oh my goodness, I was told God when I committed my life to him, and he gave me a desire to live missionally. I still desire to live missionally, but every day has gone by. I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do. And I think that's a lot of people's testimony, unfortunately. And I love that God has given us a mission, and I love that he's given us a heart that wants to do that. I love that he's like, hey, go and reach people. And we're like, yes. He says, go tell others about the treasure that you found. And we're like, yes, that's what I want to do. Because that's what you want to do whenever you find a treasure, right? It's to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We want to be that, to be ambassadors for Jesus. And you guys have heard me say this a million times, but he gives us the desire and the privilege of being ministers of reconciliation, ministers as a part of the kingdom work of God. Are you guys aware that we get to be a part of the kingdom work of God? Eternal things we get to be a part of. That's crazy. God trusts us to do that. He asks us to do that. He allows us to be a part of that. And I think sometimes we, again, look and we go, man, I kind of got distracted from what I was meant to do. And this is our last Sunday before our launch. Our launch is next week, which, by the way, launch is not lunch, okay? Because that was a mistake that was made with one of our team members. And somebody came back and they were like, yeah, I invited them to the lunch. And I was like, we're not having a lunch. And they were like, or the dinner or whatever. And I was like, it's a launch. And then they were like, oh, these are missionaries we sent out into the world, like mission teams. And so if there's a lady that comes next week and she's wondering where lunch is, bring her to me and we'll take her out after, because it was promised to her, and that's just good customer service, all right? So anyways, but we've got our launch coming up, and one thing that I want to make sure that we do as our last Sunday together before we enter a new season of ministry. This is like new season Eve right now. We're about to enter into a new season of ministry with different faces in the room, by God's grace, hopefully. And it's just going to be a little bit different. I mean, we're in a different space. Everything's just going to be a little bit different. And here's what I want to make sure that we do before we go into the new season of ministry. I want to make sure that we all are exactly where we're supposed to be for God to use us to get into a new season of ministry. So today is going to be a little bit of some heart checking, because as we look at Joshua chapter 24, Joshua is going to be, he knows he's later on in years. They've been fighting and winning and doing all the things, and they've inhabited the promised land that was promised to Abraham hundreds of years before. They're there now. They're in it. And you know what's really easy to do once you get in it? Become comfortable. You just become a little bit comfortable. And I think that we as a church, as we're kind of in this space, we could become a little bit comfortable, but we don't want to become comfortable. So Joshua looks at them and he says, hey guys, you've been successful in getting to this space, but if you're going to be successful as you're moving forward, then you're going to have to commit your life. You're going to make sure that you've committed your lives to Jesus, to God. And so they aren't sure about Jesus yet, by the way, in Joshua. Man, that's a cliffhanger though. But whenever they're there, he said, hey, what I need you to do is remember I'm with you. At the beginning of this thing, he was like, remember I'm with you. Study this book of the law continually. Meditate on it day and night. Do the things that I tell you to do, and then you're going to succeed. And they followed after him, and God let them succeed and brought them victory and victory and victory. Now they're at the end, and they're kind of sitting there, and Joshua was like, don't get comfortable, okay? Don't get distracted from what you are meant to do. So I want to look at Joshua chapter 24, because what we're going to do and how he does this, how he prepares them for this commitment that he's going to show them, that he's going to ask them to do, this commitment. He tells them to reflect on God's faithfulness to them. He's like, I want you to reflect first. I'm giving you the answers before we even get into it. Reflecting on God's faithfulness to them. He asks them to reflect on their faithfulness to him, and then he asks them to renew their commitment. So I want you to see what's coming. I want you to see what's coming this morning. We're going to reflect on God's faithfulness. We're going to reflect on our faithfulness to him. And then we're going to have a time where we will just see if we need to recommit some things to him. So let's start in Joshua chapter 24, and we're going to be in verse 1. It'll be on the screen if you need it. I'm reading from the New Living Translation today. And so feel free to use a different translation if you would like to get a better idea of what's being said here. But this is what Joshua chapter 24, verse 1 through 13 first. Let's read this. Here we go. It says, then Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, which, by the way, this has nothing to do with anything, but Shechem is where God made the promise to Abraham. So it's on purpose that he brought them to this space. It's pretty cool. So he says, I want the elders to come, the leaders to come, the judges to come, the officers, and everybody's probably going, okay, things are getting pretty serious if he's asking all these people to show up. So they came and presented themselves to God. They're all standing there. All of the Israelites, all of these people, they're all standing there in Shechem before Joshua. And Joshua says this to them, all right? Remember, this is nearing the end. Joshua says to the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. They've been fighting for years. He says, long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshiped other gods. But this is what God says, God, took your ancestor Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him into the land of Canaan, which they're now standing in. I gave him many descendants through his son Isaac, as he promised he would. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave the mountains of Seir, while Jacob and his children went down into Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron and brought terrible plagues upon Egypt. And afterward, because remember, they were in slavery in Egypt. And afterward, I brought you out as free people. But when your ancestors arrived at the Red Sea, what happened? The Egyptians were chasing after you with chariots and charioteers. When your ancestors cried out to the Lord, I put darkness between you and the Egyptians. I brought the sea crashing down on the Egyptians, drowning them. With your very own eyes, you saw what I did. Then you lived in the wilderness for many years, and he took care of them in the wilderness while they were there. Even though it was their fault, they were in the wilderness. Verse 8, he says, finally, I brought you into the land of the Amorites on the east side of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I destroyed them for you. I gave you victory over them, and you took possession of their land. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, started a war against Israel. He summoned Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to him. Instead, I made Balaam bless you, and so I rescued you from Balak. And when you crossed the Jordan River, he's like, remember that several years ago? And came to Jericho, the men of Jericho, what'd they do? They fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I gave you victory over them, and I sent terror ahead of you to drive out the two kings of the Amorites. It was not, listen to what he says. He's like, if you start to think big of yourself, it was not you. It was not you. It was not your swords or bows that brought you victory. I gave you land you had not worked on, and I gave you towns you did not build, the towns where you are now living. I gave you vineyards and olive groves for food, though you did not plant them. He's like, you are living in my blessing. You are living in something that I have given to you. And he brings up how he's provided for Abraham and Isaac. He's reminding them of his faithfulness. He's saying, hey, I want you to think about this. I want you to reflect on God's faithfulness to every single one of you. He brings up, Jacob and Esau. He brought them out of slavery. He protected them in battle. He's done all of these things. Everything that the Israelites had up to this moment, no one could say that they had obtained on their own. Not one of them. It was God who brought them to that point. God's goodness to them, God's love for them, and he'd remained faithful to them even when they were faithless. So often, God remained faithful to them. Guys, that's the character of who God is. And listen, I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you guys have ever seen 50 First Dates? Have you guys ever seen that movie? 2004 is when that came out. All right, I was about 30. I'm just kidding. That's not true. 2004 is whenever that came out. And if you guys remember, there's a guy named Henry, and he's played by who? Adam Sandler, right? And then there's a girl. What's her name? Do you guys remember? What? No. Who is it played by? Drew Barrymore, though, right? And in that movie, her name's Lucy. I should probably stick to my notes. Her name's Lucy, but in that, she's got short-term memory loss, all right? She literally wakes up in the morning and she cannot remember what happened at all right? She has, like the day before, at all. And so she forgets him every single day. Lucy forgets Henry. And because remember, he was like, man, I really love her. But the problem is that every single day she forgot him, every single day. And so instead of giving up, this is what he does. He patiently reminds her of their love daily by showing her what? A video every single day. He's like, every single day she wakes up and he's like, hey, press play on this. And she presses play and she sees what happened in her life. She sees the accident that took her memory, and she sees that she's fallen in love with this guy. And she kind of looks at him as she's seeing him for the first time, because in her brain she is. And all he does is remind her the whole time of how much that he loves her and all of the things that he has done for her. And seeing his love and his care for her at the beginning of every day restores the connection each time. Every single day, it restores that connection. And I love that. And I feel like that we as Christians, and you're like, how are you going to tie 50 First Dates into a message? I feel like we as Christians often operate like we have short-term memory loss when it comes to the goodness and faithfulness of God. We got short-term memory loss. Like God does some amazing things in our lives, and then not maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years later, we're like, God, where are you? Where have you been my whole life? Have you ever, we have this short-term memory loss. And it seems like God could do something amazing in our lives, and then we just forget. And what does that do? It brings disconnection between us and God. When we forget about God's faithfulness, we start to have a disconnection between us and God. God didn't make us a movie for every day we wake up, but you know what he did do? He wrote us a book to remind us every day of his faithfulness. Every day we look into this and we go, wow, through Jesus Christ, I get to have forgiveness of my sin. Even though I'm not worthy of grace or mercy, God gives me grace and mercy. And then what does that do? That connects you back to God, because you are reminded of his faithfulness, even in your unfaithfulness. Because it makes you go, God, I'm not worthy of this. I don't deserve this. But not only that, not only do we have the word, but we also have the things that he's done in our lives personally, to where we go, man, that was really cool whenever God did that. One thing I was challenged to do a long time ago is to write those things down when they happen, because how many of us are prone to forget? I am. I'm so prone to forget those things. And so I think that remembering his goodness helps us to reconnect and reminds us not only of his commitment to be faithful to us, but our the commitment that we made, at salvation, to be faithful to him. So here's something that I want to do for a minute, all right? Everybody's got a phone. Some of you guys are taking notes on paper. So whatever you want to do, pull up a notes page on your phone real quick. Go ahead and get that baby out. And then, or if you're using a piece of paper, then you can write this down as well. But I want you to start a new note just for a second, okay? And here's what I want you to do. I'd like for each of us to reflect and take about 3 minutes and reflect on God's faithfulness to you. It could be scripture. It could be anything. It could just be something that, oh man, like think through your life. At what points, like the job that you're in, how did you get that job? Was that part of God's faithfulness in your life? The kids that you have, the spouse that you have, the siblings that you have, whatever, like write down some things where you're like, all right, God, this was faith. Maybe there was a season where you were just really worrying and you were anxious about something, yet the Lord provided in a way that you were like, man, that was even better than I thought. Like, what are some ways that he's been faithful? I want you guys to take about 3 minutes and just write down as many reminders of God's faithfulness in your life that you can. Reminders of his provision and grace. All right, do that. Is that God is faithful. That's one thing that will always be true, is that God is faithful. And one thing that I want you guys to do is, if you've got it down on your phone, keep that notes page. And I want you just to continue adding to it. Every single time that God has done something where you're just like, wow, Lord, thank you. Thank you for working in that moment. Thank you for working in my life. Pull out your notes page and just write that down, something that you can always go back to, because that's what Joshua, before he asks them to recommit to him, he says, remember God's faithfulness. Remember that. And then next he's going to say, and I want you to reflect on your faithfulness to him as well. So let's look at verse 14 and 15 really quick. And here's what it says. It says this: so fear the Lord. He's like, remember all the things that he's done. Remember it all and fear him. Fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose this day who you're going to serve. He's like, who are you going to serve? If you're not going to serve God, you're going to serve somebody. So go ahead and choose who it is that you want to serve. Is it going to be yourself? Is it going to be another God, like a God that's been defeated by our God, the real God, a God that doesn't even really exist? But he's like, no matter what, if you refuse to serve the Lord, then go ahead and choose today who you're going to serve. And why? Because when you start considering that, it sounds a lot foolish to think about serving any other thing other than the actual God of heaven and earth, the God of the Israelites. And he says this: would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the God of the Amorites in whose land you now live? He's reminding them of defeated gods. He says, no. Me, Joshua, as for me and my family, as for me and my house, you might have this over your fireplace if you have a fireplace. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, because he's proven himself faithful over and over and over again. And you know that first phrase, so fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. That's an interesting phrase, I think, to come off of the heels of remembering God's faithfulness. Isn't that interesting? Because like, hey, remember God's faithfulness. Remember all the things that he's done for you. Remember that he's never failed you. Remember that you are where you are right now because of his grace in your life, because of his favor in your life, because of his faithfulness in your life. And he's saying all of these, and he's like, so fear him. So fear him and serve him. And I think that's interesting that right after that, he's like, so fear the Lord and serve him. And it's like, why? Like, what does it mean that we're supposed to fear the Lord and serve him? I'm sure that you guys all know who Kanye West is, right? Man, about 6 years ago, it was like, oh, Kanye got saved. He came out with an album, right? And everybody was like, man, we love like his Jesus is King album. And Christians were just like, yes, let's go. We got one. And this is Kanye. And the whole time I was just kind of sitting back, because Kanye got a little bit of a history. I was kind of like sitting back a little bit and going, let's just see. Let's see how this plays out, right? And anyways, you guys, how many of you guys are aware that Kanye no longer follows Jesus, right? He like admittedly says that he's no longer a Christian. And I saw a video the other day of him explaining why he's no longer a Christian. Maybe some of you guys have seen it, but this clip, he had a big hang up of this fear God idea in the Bible. Have you guys seen this video? This fear God idea. Like it's him explaining why he's no longer a Christian. And he said that if God is supposed to be loving, then why would we need to fear him? If God is loving, why would we need to fear him? He said that when you fear something, it's one fear that leads to another fear that leads to another fear, and all of a sudden you're controlled by that fear. And then he says, and I don't want to be controlled by fear. He said that doesn't make sense, that God is a God of love, yet we're supposed to fear him. I'm not going to fear anybody. Pride, right? It's the downfall. And so what happened? Did Kanye lose his salvation? No. I think his salvation was revealed. It never was. It never existed. That's for free on the side, by the way. So anyways, he said, and the thing is you guys understand this. I understand this. He doesn't understand the word what? Fear. He doesn't understand what it means to fear the Lord. And maybe some of you guys are sitting in this room and you're going, well, wait a minute, what? That kind of makes sense. Like, what does he mean, fear, right? And so what does that mean? What does that mean? It doesn't mean like to be afraid, like as in the boogeyman, like be afraid of like God, right? It means to serve God with awe. It means to serve him with wonder, like to look at him and to go, wow. You are big. Like if you can be faithful in all of these things, in defeating all of these things and getting me to where I am today, you must be all powerful. And if you can continue to be faithful in everybody else's lives who are your children, then you must be faithful. I mean, you must be powerful. And if you can do it all together, if you can orchestrate Alex's life, if you can orchestrate Carrie's life and Rachel's life, and if you can orchestrate my life and all of it, and you're working out and you're being faithful to everyone, you have got to be a huge, amazing, wonderful, all-knowing, all-powerful God. And whenever we realize that of his faithfulness and how good that he is, we should just step back and go, whoa, he is big. And there's going to be a sense of just awe and respect that you step back and just go, wow. That's why he says, hey, remember his faithfulness in your life, then fear him and serve him because he's the only one worthy. He's the only one worthy. You want to go ahead and choose your day who you're going to serve? Go ahead. See how that works out for you. But Josh says, for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Remembering God's faithfulness should make us go, wow, what a mighty God that we have, and put a respect in us and a reverence into our hearts. And I don't know about you guys, but who else do you want to serve? You want to serve yourself? Because I'll tell you, that's going to end up pretty pitiful if that's who you're going to choose to serve is yourself. No, we're going to serve the Lord, be loyal to the Lord. And so what I want to do, I want you to get your phones back out for a second. Because we've reflected on God's faithfulness to us, I want to reflect on our faithfulness to him just for a moment. And I think we need to ask ourselves this question. Maybe you can type this in as the heading. What are the things that are competing for loyalty in my life? What are the things that are competing for loyalty, competing with the Lord? What are things that are competing for loyalty in my heart? What are things that are competing for loyalty in my life? What are things that hinder my full devotion to God? What are things that distract me from serving him wholeheartedly? Like that man said in the Apple store, I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do. What are those things? So let's take a couple of minutes and let's write down those things. Okay, maybe that list, you're just thinking of a lot of things. That's okay. You can add to that list in a moment. And as the Lord brings those things to your mind, maybe you can pull that back out and just say, okay, I need to add that one to it as well, right? But so this is what he says. All right, let's paint this picture again. He's like, I want you to remember God's faithfulness to you. Remember that. And then I want you to remember, because of his faithfulness, who are you going to serve? Remember your faithfulness to you. What's been keeping you from serving him? Who else have you been serving? Like, maybe he didn't ask him to write these things down, but I know those things are going through their minds and they're just like, who have I been serving? And I know the Lord is working in their hearts and he's stirring a people and he's saying, I want you to come back to me, because this is how you're going to be successful. As you move forward into this promise, this is how you're going to be successful. And so then he brings them to this moment of decision. And this is what the reply is from all of the Israelites who were standing there. In verse 16, here's what he says. Then the people replied, they said, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. Listen to him cry this out. For the Lord our God, you're right, he's the one who rescued us out of and our ancestors from slavery in the land of Egypt. You're right, he performed mighty miracles before our very eyes as we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies. You're right, Joshua, he preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations. You're right, everybody who was living there, he drove them out. So you know what, we too will serve the Lord. Just like you, Joshua, we too are going to serve the Lord alone, for he alone alone is our God. And then Joshua warned the people. He's like, okay, you guys are saying this out loud. He warns the people, you're not able to serve the Lord, for he is holy and jealous. He's a holy and jealous God. He's not going to forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you abandon the Lord and serve other gods, he's going to turn against you and destroy you, even though he has been so good to you. He's like, what are you going to do with that? And the people answered Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. We're going to serve the Lord. He says, you're a witness to your own decision, Joshua said. You're a witness to your own decision here. You have chosen to serve the Lord. And they replied, yep, we are witnesses to what we have just said. He said, all right then, destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts. In other words, destroy those things that you just wrote down. Destroy those things. And he says, destroy the idols among you. Turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God. We will obey him alone. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day at Shechem, committing them to follow the decrees and regulations of the Lord. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions. And as a reminder of their agreement, he took a huge stone and he rolled it beneath the terebinth tree beside the tabernacle of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, hey, this stone has heard everything the Lord said to us. It will be a witness to testify against you if you go back on your word to God. He's like, so when you look at that stone, always be reminded, are you still faithfully following him? Because remember, he made a commitment to you. Then Joshua sent all of the people away to their own homelands. And guys, I wonder, as we have written down and remembered God's faithfulness to us, as we've written down and we've remembered what it is that's distracting us, what it is that has kind of taken us and to where we may be going, you know what? I think I got distracted from what I was meant to do. Like we wrote those things down. This is a moment, guys, before we enter into a new season of ministry, this is a moment where I would love for our church, right? Guys, look, the strength of this church does not rely on my righteousness as a pastor. The strength and the success of this church does not rely on Tamara's or Savannah's. It doesn't rely on us as a staff. The strength and the success of this church relies on you, your faithfulness. Are we going to be faithful with what God has given to us? And I say this every single week, but I look around and I go, what in the world are we sitting in right now? What in the world? This is crazy. But the Lord is entrusting this to us, guys. And so if we're going to be successful about stepping into this new season, into this promise, guys, we all have to sit here and go, who am I going to serve? Will we have the same response as the Israelites did in this moment? Remembering God's faithfulness, remembering that there's really nobody else worth serving. Are we going to in this moment go, you're right, God, I'm going to turn away from these things. I'm no longer going to be distracted. I'm no longer going to be distracted from what I was meant to do. Guys, you live in New York City for a reason. It's not an accident that God has placed you as a believer in this city, because there aren't very many. He brought you here as a missionary. He brought you here as a minister of reconciliation. He brought you here to be his hands and his feet. He brought you here to be a voice for the gospel, and you're like, no, he brought me here because I got transferred in my job. Whoa, that's short thinking right there. That's not why. He didn't pick you up and move you because he wanted you to go and do a job. In the world's eyes, he brought you here to do a job that's kingdom big. And so guys, what I want us to do right now is I just want every single one of us to deal with God for a moment. Can we look at this list and say, Lord, I give this to you. Help me to not be distracted by these things. They're all important things. I'm not saying you got to quit your job tomorrow, okay? I don't recommend that. But I am saying maybe it's taking first place in your heart and it's the main thing, and it doesn't need to be the main thing. Maybe it's your mission field. Whatever it is, I want us just to bow our heads for just a second. And I just want to ask you guys to just deal with him just for a moment.